Hey, what's up, you guys? This is Remington McElhaney coming at you again from aetuts.com. Today we have this hand-drawn title effect. Let's take a look at that. Okay, now as you can see, it slowly animates on and it fills in and the stroke comes on in. Now when I say hand-drawn, I do mean hand-drawn. This was not created with strokes. If you look at the video Copilot tutorial, which I'm sure a lot of you are thinking of, it's also a great one, and it's definitely much faster than this. It gives you a similar result, but you don't have nearly the kind of control for the strokes and for the fill inside of it. So that is why this is different. Was hand-drawn frame by frame. When we originally started on this project, we wanted it to be a hand-drawn effect, so we figured we could spend some time and we could play around with strokes and try to animate it that way. We figured the best way was simply just to go ahead and take it and hand draw it ourselves. It was for a production company out of Washington, D.C. They're called Blue Sky Films, and they created this video. I guess it's more of a promotional video for an organization called Fight for Children. So it was for promoting grade schools in Washington, D.C., so they really wanted this nice hand-drawn effect, and it really blended quite nicely with their video. So while we discuss this, I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the techniques for creating this, getting these letters from your piece of paper onto this efficiently, because it is very time consuming. I spent about close to 30 hours on this project, which is a decent amount of time when you figure about 25 of those hours were sitting in a studio hand drawing all these letters. I pretty much did just about every letter in the alphabet except for the U and the plus, which I just did this morning. So here's my setup for what I'd use to capture these letters. Now, what I have set up here is I used my digital camera. You can also use a scanner to do this. If you have a fast scanner, that's probably easier. It's a little bit more controlled, but my scanner is pretty darn slow, so I went for the digital camera method. And what I did is I have it tethered to my laptop right here, and I use Nikon, I think Capture. I think that's their capture program. I got a free trial of that, and I just used that for that. Because basically you want to eliminate, if you're going to use a camera, any kind of shake, because every time you capture a frame, if it moves just a tiny bit, it's going to throw off your animation quite a bit. So you really want to control that. If you have some sort of tripod or device where you can capture it above the image, that's really useful too. I didn't, so what I went ahead and did is, as you can see, it's just a Nike shoebox, and I set my camera and was very careful not to move it when I was shooting. I have this clipboard set up and I super glued rulers to it. That way, every time I put the piece of paper, it would line up along these edges pretty nicely, and then clip it on top. So while tethered, all I had to do was press enter on my keyboard. The camera would fire, it would save a file. I'd take the page off, put it back up down on the desk, redraw it into the next part, put it back up, take the picture. So while drawing these letters, what I did was I went ahead and printed out a template, and it's kind of a wooden looking font. So I printed that out and put a piece of paper on top of it. And what I did was, you want to find out how long your animation is going to be. If it's going to be fairly short like this for how they're drawing on, you don't need to spend a lot of time making a lot of frames. The first test I did about 40 frames for the first letter, and that was just way too much because I ended up cutting out about 90% of it. So what I found worked well for me was I went ahead and I did 4 frames for the outline. Go ahead and show you that right now. So I did 4 frames for the outline, 4 frames for the, I guess for the 3D look, I don't know what to call that, but to add to that, and then 4 frames for the fill. So if we take a look at that, you can see we've got 4 frames, fills in, and then what I did was I went ahead and just drew 4 different ones, so that way when it's finished it'll just continue to loop like so. Now also, when working on this loop, another important thing to be aware of is that you don't want to try to change the size necessarily unless that's the look you're going for. Really what you want to do is don't try to make it look different in between each one that you do. If you do, it'll end up looking too different and it'll really start to pop. These ones are kind of bouncing a little bit, but that's okay for now. But really, as long as you just redraw it 4 times, you will naturally go ahead and make it slightly different just every time, and that'll work out just fine. As you can see, just a tiny bit different. Now when I did most of these letters, I used a black crayon. I was just out of black crayons because I burned through all of mine for that project, so I used a purple and put a tint on top of it. It works fine. But just pick a nice dark color. And if you pick a nice dark color, you can always change it later on with hue and saturation pretty easily. So go ahead and record in black, dark purple, dark blue. It'll make it easier on you later on. Okay, so let's discuss, now that you've taken the time, you've gone ahead and drawn out all of these letters. Hopefully you're a little quicker than I am. This was the first problem I ran into, was how am I going to go ahead and get all of these letters inside of After Effects into a nice little composition and make it nice and easy. I certainly did not want to rotoscope 12 images per frame per letter, 12 frames per letter. What I ended up doing was I created a matte for each layer. So I photoshopped one, set it as the transfer track matte for it, and then I called that good. Then while recording this tutorial, I was actually pretty proud of that, because I'm like, oh, you know, I took 12 frames and turned it into one frame in Photoshop, so I was okay with that. Then while recording this tutorial, I realized you can completely eliminate Photoshop altogether and just use transfer modes. Now, I don't know if that's very apparent to most of you. If it was, kudos. But to me, it was not the first thing that jumped into my mind. The first thing was, how can I avoid rotoscoping a lot of images? And I ended up settling for just rotoscoping a few images. I think we can all agree that rotoscoping is not the funnest thing in the world, so anytime you can eliminate that, it's definitely a plus. I've yet to meet anybody that just loves to rotoscope. So, let's take a look at this now. I'm going to go ahead and start on importing a new set of images, and we're going to discuss how to deal with that. Track these down. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start with the plus sign. This might seem a little bit backwards from what you guys, from the animation. The reason is that I already had all of these letters set up with the Photoshop files, so I just redid the U and the plus this morning, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. So we're going to select the first one, make sure we have a JPEG sequence selected. We're going to import it. We're going to drag that into a new composition. But first, let's go ahead and make sure we take this and we go to the interpret footage. We go to the main. We make it 15 frames per second, because that's what we're going to use for this animation. Okay? Okay, so now that we're in here, we're going to first, right off the bat, we're going to delete the last 3 frames. This one, I did 3 frames for the fill. Let's go ahead and extend this composition. Since I just changed the interpretation, it changed a little bit. Okay. So we're going to take off the last 4 frames, I believe. And we're going to use that later on for the loop. So as soon as it fills right there, I'm going to cut it off. Okay. So now we have that set up. Let's go ahead and take this and we're going to duplicate it. I'm going to rename this. This is our U sequence. And then we'll call this our U comp as well. It's very helpful to make sure you stay organized, especially if you're going to have more letters than this. Okay, so we have this U sequence. We're going to go ahead and drag it into another composition. This time we're going to axe everything but the last 4 frames. Drag that on over. We're going to go ahead and move the work area. We go composition, trim comp to work area. Then we're going to take this U loop pre-comp. We're going to drag it into a new one. Let's call this U loop. And inside of this U loop, we're going to go ahead and make the composition 10 seconds long. Go ahead and show the full thing. We're going to select it. We're going to hit Control D or Edit, Duplicate, and we're going to do that about 10 times. Then we can go ahead and select all of them. If you hold down Shift, it'll select all of them. Hit Control D again about 3 or 4 times, maybe one more for good measure. Then we're going to go to the very bottom, go all the way to the top, right click, go keyframe assist, we're going to sequence the layers. I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK. So as you can see, I did about 20 too many. That's fine. Basically, it's just going to loop this composition over and over and over again. Okay, so now we go back to our U, and we go ahead and show the full comp. We bring our loop layer in. I'm going to drop it in right at the end. Move it over a frame. Make sure we have a good transition. You might want to go ahead, if yours aren't perfectly lined up, lower the opacity of the comp, move it around, see if it fits, but mine is pretty dead on, so we'll go leave it as is. Okay. So now what we have is it starts in and it just loops forever. Let's go ahead and just create a quick mask around here. Just kind of a garbage mask. As you can see, when you my scanner actually is the reason why I have these. It actually kind of got on the glass, which I'm sure isn't good for it. But these little crayon dusts, just try to blow that away when you're working on it. Just get it out of your way. Let's go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. What I did in Photoshop also when I originally did this was I created another layer, and what I did was I just simply took a white layer and I just covered up everything at the final layer. I put it on top of everything, and then that way it went ahead and just got rid of all those little specks. This is only for those two little letters, and you won't even notice, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave it for now. So it comes on just like that. We're going to have a new composition. We're going to make this, I'm going to do mine 1280 by 720. Doesn't really matter what you do, but 15 frames per second is pretty important. We're going to call this titles. Okay. Then we're going to take our U. I've been calling it U this whole time. We're going to call that plus. Sorry about that. I did a U and I was talking about it, and it's really a plus sign. I'm sure you all were enjoying that. Okay, so. Remember when I said stay organized? Yeah, it's helpful. Okay, so now we have our titles. We're going to go ahead and drag the plus sign in. Let's go ahead and make a new, actually, we're going to take this paper and we're going to drop it on the bottom. Now originally when I did this project, as you can see, it was on a white background, so I wasn't as concerned about having some transparency and just showing this, because if you look now, we have it animates on, and you could create mats for it. Originally what I did was I had it cropped out on the edges, but then as it would animate in, it would still have this white right here. So you still only could use it on a white background. Until I thought, oh wait, let's use a transfer mode. So let's take this paper image and scale it up. And then we're going to go ahead and toggle your switches if your transfer mode is not showing. We're going to set that to multiply. And bam, right away, instant rotoscoped, basically. Wish I had done this sooner. So you can go ahead and scale it down. And we're going to go ahead and go, since it's purple right now, let's talk about coloring it. We're going to go Effect, Color Correction, Tint, Effect, Color Correction, Hue, and Saturation. We're going to go Colorize, kick up the saturation a little bit. You can really choose whatever color you like. I went with like kind of a light blue in my preview. Go with like we'll go with red this time. That's pink, that's definitely not red. We'll go with a red this time. And as you can see, it animates on and continues to loop. So that is the basic process. If you go ahead and create a ruler, drop it on the bottom right here, you want to make sure you line them up right along there. If you go inside our footage, have an A, drag that on, scale it down. As you can see, this one actually does have an alpha channel on the edges because this was set up for my earlier project. But the same thing still applies using multiply. Now this is really just to show the power of using transfer modes and how much time that can save you. It would have saved me a decent amount of time if I had originally thought of that. Same thing, we can go ahead and copy the hue and saturation from the plus sign, drop it onto the A. I've got the E, Drop that in here. Scale it to 16% since that seems to be what I'm doing. We'll go ahead and paste that here in saturation. Put it on multiply. Now, as you can see in this E, actually, I have that mask and it's cutting off a little bit too much. I don't know if you guys noticed that in the preview video or not. So, go back into titles and we're good. Okay, so I think you guys are getting the basic idea. We're going to go ahead and drag another T in here just to finish this out, I guess. Scale it down. Now the most time is going to be spent definitely on going ahead and creating these images. It's time consuming, but you can really control the look that you're going for. You can pick which font you want to use, you can print out a nice template, and you can spend the amount of time you want to get the look you want and really control the animation. If you want the fill to come on first and then the stroke to outline it, really, that's up to you, and that's kind of your personal preference right there. But the biggest things to remember are you want to go ahead and make sure you eliminate the shake by using those techniques. You want to go ahead and make sure you use a ruler. Make sure you're really consistent on your extra 4 for the loop, because that's very important as well. And then once you're inside After Effects, you can see the time is actually really minimized if you go ahead and just utilize transfer modes. It takes a lot of the work out for you. So hopefully you can realize that later on in your other projects, maybe to go ahead and consider those instead of rotoscoping if that is something that is available to you for your project. So, once you get that all together again, we're going to go ahead and show you one more time. You go ahead and just sequence the layers just a few frames apart, that's fine. They animate on nicely. And that is your title. Alright, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this and learned a little bit, and go ahead and make your own little handwritten title sequences, because it really is a nice effect and it looks pretty darn good. Alright, so thank you guys and have a good day.